Matulich-Hall, and this is a special edition of Titles, Talk, and Tipples. I am on site with Helen McKay Sanders, author of the RINGMAKER series and The Widowed Warlock. Thank you for being on my show, Helen.
I greatly appreciate you inviting me. It's lovely to be here, and I'm so glad you were able to visit.
Yes, we're on Lopez Island on in Helen's beautiful home on an awesome tract of land. And most importantly, perhaps, the tipples. And cheers.
Cheers.
We are tippling on spiked kombucha.
It's not a bad mix, yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah, it's not working.
You know, two fermented things, you can't go wrong, right?
No, I've never looked at it that way, yeah. But that's probably right.
All right, so we're discussing our influences tonight.
So let me ask you a question. I've read two short stories of yours. Let's see. Trash to Treasure and Death Dust, which are both really nicely written, clear fantasy stories. Who were your influences?
You know, when it comes to short stories, I'm a huge fan of Ray Bradbury, and I know I talk about him often on this show. But he, you know, the first short stories I read that just gripped me were his stories.
What did you read first? Do you remember?
You know, I don't. I do remember reading.
Did he do The Illustrated Man?
He did.
Okay. Yeah.
I haven't read that, but I think the first thing I remember as an adult reading was Dandelion Wine, and that's just one of my favorite books. I read it every couple of years.
Okay.
It's almost like a novel, a complete novel, but it's like there's a common thread through it. So it happens in the same town, and it's about dandelion wine, making dandelion wine. And it focuses on this kid, but also all the people in the village, and so it's like short stories, but
vignettes of people that are central to the main story.
Yeah.
Okay.
And some of them are creepy, and you know, one short story is about a serial killer. Another short story is just like them gathering dandelions to make this wine, and he's describing how one summer when he or his little brother were super sick, and how his grandmother fed him dandelion wine. And so it's like, you know, you have the description, just basic description of life, and then like this scary story in the middle of it that you're not expecting.
Interesting.
And so that's, I would say that's my biggest influence when it comes to short stories.
Okay.
The first person that comes to mind.
Yeah, I have not read Dandelion Wine. I did read The Illustrated Man, and then I read short stories that were based on the Illustrated Man's construct. So it was very similar as to what you're talking about with Dandelion Wine. Yeah. I didn't read Dandelion Wine, though.
Yeah, so you need to read Dandelion Wine, and I need to read The Illustrated Man.
Yeah. Who else do you think?
Well, you know, and I hate to... I'm sure there are a lot of writers that are influenced by other writers, but my very, you know, early memories are like watching The Twilight Zone and The Outer Limits. And Ray Bradbury theater, and just loving the tingle up the spine I would get with watching those kind of spooky, kind of dark things. And then so when I delved it, Ray Bradbury's a writer, I could read, because I loved reading too. But I would also, you know, who comes to mind, and I'm not a horror writer, so it's funny that a lot of my influences are kind of dwell in that genre. But I don't like nothing against people that write it, but I don't necessarily like splatter punk or anything like that. That's just too much for me. But I like the spookiness of Poe, Edgar Allan Poe. Huge influence. I mean, I've been reading Edgar Allan Poe since junior high or middle school.
What about Stephen King? Did you ever read
I was going to say Stephen King. I remember loving, it was the Stand By Me was based on it, The Body, and I think it was called 4 Seasons. It was a short story compilation. I could be wrong about the title, and I could always look that up. But when I think about short stories, those are the kind of stories that pop up in my head, and The Body was one of them. And and of course, you know, when you start getting older, it's like, was that the story I read, or was that actually a movie? Because you know, so many things are made into a movie.
Right, they do kind of blend together in your mind. I know I went to the library and I was very attracted to horror as a genre.
Oh gosh, yeah.
And I would go to the library, and for some reason I did not read H.P. Lovecraft. I don't know why.
I have to admit, and people will probably cringe, I have never read H.P. Lovecraft.
You know, he's got a mood, and he's got a language usage that's intriguing, but he lays it on like a 5-year-old being let into a jar of peanut butter for the first time. I am not kidding. It is like, oh, the words and this, and it's so dark, and it's deep, and we're going through this tunnel, and the guy is so heavy, he's with morbid, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it just goes on like that forever. But in that H.P. Lovecraft, I read him like in the last year. Yeah, he's totally tolerable, and he does set a mood, and the mood is way more viscous than Edgar Allan Poe. It's just heavy and thick and verbose and interesting. And but I got into Alfred Hitchcock anthology collection.
Oh my gosh, they still exist.
I love those. Well, yeah, that's when I read them. I was like, my mother started dragging me to the library when I was 9 or 10, maybe 8, and I immediately found those books and just, I would take 2 home a week, and I read them until they were gone.
Yeah, and I have one that I like, so when I have come across paperbacks, I'll read them and then I'll pass them on, but hardbacks, I keep everything if I find a hardback, and I found an Alfred Hitchcock anthology in hardback. And it's great because they're stories he personally read and enjoyed. A lot of times just the people that continued his legacy are the ones. But this one, he was like, these are stories I chose, and I'm like,
yeah, and they work. They all work.
Oh gosh.
Oh my God. I remember those.
Do you remember any one particularly?
Yeah, I do. There was one about this traveler. I think the book was called The Traveler's Rest. And it started out with this guy staying at this inn, and he starts there and he kind of overhears conversations that make him a little squeamish and worried. And then he goes on to the next inn, and they serve him something like soup, and it was fairly tasty soup. And he goes on to the next inn, and it's like The Rest of the Traveler, and the names of the inns begin to imply that the Traveler's Head, and yeah, so and
that's great.
And it was done so well, and the guy keeps eating the food at each inn, and it's actually, you know, people who've been parboiled or chopped into mince or what have you. And I remember reading that and just going, for the longest time, I had this horrible fear of hotel rooms, and my mother was like, Ellen, what's wrong with you? But it was because of that was a particularly gruesome short story. I really enjoyed the hell out of it.
I'll have to try to find it.
I mean, we should look up The Traveler's Rest.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
After we're done doing this.
One story I read was, and I read it twice because it's in the hardback that I kept, and it just sticks in my mind. It's about this woman that she basically gets kidnapped, but she's so badass, like, and she owns the situation, and it's just so great that. I mean, I think it was written in like the 50s or something, and I'm like, where did because you don't read a lot of stories like that based in the 50s. It's like housewives with pearls and heels, and yeah, she was all lady, but she gets kidnapped, and you're looking at it from her point of view and her fear and everything, but she just totally takes control of the situation. It ends up okay, but it just. That really stuck in my mind, and I think because I was younger when I read it the first time, and I have books, I have hardback books that I've had since I was like 10 years old, and that story, so it was like influential, not just in writing, but like in life. It's like, I want to be a badass girl, and like Yeah.
Well, so many of the magazines, I think, you see from the 40s, the 50s, the 60s, they all have these big busted women with their mouth in a perpetual O, and you've got "It came from outer space" behind it, or something like that, and the man's with the ray gun, and it's just really, it's very male. The male is just going to save the day. It's very from the point of view of the male, and so when you have something like that, like I think immediately of Sigourney Weaver in Alien.
Oh gosh, yeah.
Who really took control of the situation while the entire crew was getting picked off.
And then, and who does she rescue?
The cat. And the name of the cat was Jones. Jonesy.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
And my husband and I, we recently watched all of them, except the most recent. We haven't watched the most recent.
There's one in there that I have a really hard time.
The fourth. Oh wait.
God.
Let's see. The second one, right?
Oh no, I love the second one. Oh, you don't like that one? Aliens?
Aliens, is that the one with the Marines?
There's a lot of shooting. There is a lot of shooting, and I really love that one.
My ultimate favorite one. I know, like Alien, the original, it was amazing. I mean, they didn't have computer generation. It was all
the cinematography
props,
was
cinematography,
amazing.
Makeup.
The lighting was amazing.
The
way they blended remember the older gentleman, he's dead now. He's an amazing character actor.
William Hurt. No, Hurt. No.
John Hurt. John Hurt played.
Yes.
I'm about to have a baby. Boom.
Yeah.
But this was the other guy.
Oh, okay.
He was an engineer. And there's a scene. There's a scene in the cooling system of the ship, and there are chains hanging down, and they've got water coming off of them, and the chains mimic the construct of the aliens' scale and dorsal fins, and it just how they did that!
Oh my God! Because before you started talking about it, I was picturing that particular scene.
That is just such a scene, and also the scene where she's smoking. But I think that's from the second book.
Oh yeah, because I don't remember her smoking.
She's smoking a cigarette, and her fingers look like the knuckles of the pre-alien before it turns into the monster that we all know.
Oh, interesting.
And James Cameron did that movie, and that was just masterfully done.
Because I'm big into cinematography too.
Yes. Yeah. Because as a writer, you can start looking at scenes as a cinematographer or a director, whatever a filmmaker does.
Yeah.
And it really adds credence and punch to scenes that otherwise might be a little ponderous, or just they don't get their legs underneath them.
Well, and I like that. That's actually a really great subject, is looking at it through a lens. Like, what are you seeing in your head to get on paper? And it's like,
and what can you leave out? What can you just leave out?
Right.
Yeah.
And not get too what do people call it? Information overload. You know, information dump, info dump. Yeah, there we go, info dump.
Yeah, a lot of young writers, including myself, beginning writers. Oh my God, overwrite like crazy.
I did it too.
We all do it.
Luckily, I had some really good beta readers.
We all do it.
We all do. Well, and I have to say, I've read a little bit of the RINGMAKER, and I was concerned. It's always when you're going to read a friend's work, I always get concerned because I'm like, oh my God, what if I don't like it? I have to tell this person
you don't
that
like
I adore that it's not for me. I mean, it's like, but I was so happy when I read that first chapter of the RINGMAKER. The RINGMAKER. It was like this, like this. I just felt refreshed, like, oh good, I don't have to tell her I don't like it, because I love it.
I would really like you to read the second chapter, because that's where the story, actually, to be honest, that first chapter was a prologue, and everybody told me, kiss of death, don't call it a prologue, and I went, fine, it's the first fricking chapter
there you
then.
go. Yeah,
it's still got to be there, otherwise the entire story's not going to make any fucking sense. So, the first chapter was the first chapter.
Well, that's an interesting thing. It's like there's
so
like
uncool
this
to have a prologue
stigma
now.
to have a prologue now. It's like, well,
And I don't. And
Just
anyway,
because it says prologue.
you know, we all have our thing.
Yeah.
And writing has got their thing. You know, I was taught. What was I taught? That thing. Never to describe the weather. Never to anthropomorphize the weather. The storm clouds were angry and rolling in. Oh my God! One of my teachers was
Really?
like, "No, do not ever do this." And so because of that, I just don't do that.
Oh, interesting.
It's a small thing,
I
but you know,
love putting things like that to the weather and stuff.
it doesn't matter. It's
Yeah.
just everybody's got their thing. That's all.
Yeah.
Now there are some things like show don't tell.
Oh, sure.
That's absolutely a fact.
That is, yeah.
Yeah, because so many people are just telling.
Walked into a room, he picked up a spatula. He
Well-
stabbed the monster in the heart. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I know. I know what you mean. Yeah.
So I really like, you make up your own creatures, and that, right? So like.
Oh yes, that's true. Yeah. I mean,
Yeah, I love that because like, for me, I think about making up something like that, like, but then I just get overwhelmed and I'm like, no, I'm just gonna work with like elves and dragons and stuff. But I have made up. But I love
Yeah.
those creatures. What were they called again?
Well, they're called Tonkiers, and they actually have a huge role in the book, and they're there for several reasons. One of them is environment. The other is to point out to people that animals aren't just animals, like we're all animals, as we've talked about with each other. And the symbiotic role that animals play with humans and how much you can learn from each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I wanted the Tonkiers in there. Also, I loved you. But the Tonkiers are not the animal, that's as far as I can go. You know, because the worms in Dune play a very important role in their culture and in their ability to hold space, which is great, that's fine. But the Tonkiers have a more integral role with magic and how magic is used on the planet. And I don't want to talk too much about that.
Yeah, don't give it away.
Oh, well, sure, because it should be interesting. And then the other thing that I really enjoy about writing RINGMAKER is that it is a culture, their magical culture was lost.
Oh.
About 500 years ago when this great calamity befell. It was many of its roots got either they disappeared or they were destroyed. And so showing the facets that need to come to light in order to make the story move forward has been both a challenge and a delight. And I think RINGMAKER is a really good beginning for that. The story is a little slow in the beginning as you're setting things up, but I think you'll really enjoy it once you finish
and
it.
I don't mind slow
Uh-huh.
if it's packed full of good information. So
Right.
it's like, I think slow does not always equal bored or boredom.
No, and I mean, look
You
at
know,
Tolkien.
Oh, gosh, I'm
His-
a huge
his is
Tolkien fan.
glacial.
Yeah. Yeah.
It might as well be the Bible because, you know, the Tooks begat the blah blah blahs and the blah blah
Oh,
blah.
gosh,
And,
yeah.
and, you know,
Yeah.
it's great.
Yeah. And I'm like, gosh, like, so often the crew of like Bilbo and Sam and like they're just walking, you know, through mountains and fields and
Yeah.
forests and that's the majority of the story is just them traveling.
But it's lovely.
But it's beautiful.
It's absolutely lovely.
Yeah, and
yeah.
it does. It grips you. You feel like you're with them, you know, walking along.
No, and I feel like the writer was there, and his
Yeah.
experience. We're getting a bird's eye view of Great Britain, basically, through his filter of how he saw the world. And I just thought it's always going to be lovely. I'll always consider that a classic, and I'll always read it. I'll read it every 4 or 5 years.
Yeah. So I don't worry about slow.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, we want to bring in exciting stuff, but I'm also not interested in nonstop action either. I need to breathe.
Oh, yeah.
I need to watch the sunset. I need to breathe the fresh air. I need to smell the flowers.
I
you know,
need some character development too.
Yeah,
You know, I gotta see people develop.
Yeah, I want to care about the character, and so so for your story, you're saying that your story kind of starts out slow. actually, no, wait a second. That first chapter is like exciting right out of the gate.
Well, for me, it was just, I just took my time setting the stage.
Okay.
That's how I feel about it in my mind's eye.
Right.
You're right, there's some action at the very beginning, and immediately, you know, you get introduced to the Tonkiers, and also a relationship between a father and a son,
Yeah,
and what the father was trying to pass down to the son, and that was, you know, great.
I don't